Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jessica Zavala, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health to today's webinar, Motivational Strategies to Engage Students Violating the Code of Conduct. Before I introduce the presenter today, who, by the way, is no stranger to our program, we're very excited to welcome him back. I do have a few brief announcements to share. First and foremost, if you are interested in CME and CEU credits, they are available. The activity code for today's session is 12 ALTO. That's 12 ALTO. This code will expire on tomorrow, February 17th at 12 p.m. Please be on the lookout for information periodically posted via the chat function regarding how to obtain credits if you are interested. Next, we invite you to join us for our next webinar on Thursday, March 30th at 11:30 a.m. We will be joined by Cindy Kluner and Ahmed Hasmi from the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery at The Ohio State University. They will present on substance misuse trends in higher education. We also hope that you will join us in person for the 6th Biennial Conference, Reimagining Campus Community Partnerships, will be held on May 18th in Columbus, Ohio at the Quest Conference Center. A call for presentations and posters has been released, and registration details will be forthcoming. If you are interested in presenting a breakout session and or poster, please visit the conferences page on our website for more details. We are also excited to partner with Living Works to host an Assist Suicide Prevention Training Workshop on March 23rd and 24th in Columbus. Please also visit our website for additional details. Our training opportunities page is where you would find that information on. Again, any and all of the events that we are hosting, you can be on the lookout for via our website, and we also encourage you to like and to subscribe, to our social media channels. For today's webinar, you may post questions, comments in our Q&A or chat function. And then finally, this webinar will be recorded and the video will be made available for viewing on our YouTube channel. And now to introduce our presenter who needs no introduction, Dr. Russell Spieth, who is the Vice President of Adult Behavioral Health at the Centers in Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. Spieth is the Vice President, again, of Adult Behavioral Health at the Centers in Cleveland, Ohio. He was previously the Managing Director of Campus Mental Health and a consultant trainer at Northeast Ohio Medical University. He is an Ohio licensed psychologist and received his PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Akron, and a counseling psychology degree, a master's in education from the Columbia University. He has more than 25 years of experience providing clinical services to persons with co-occurring mental and substance use disorders, and has trained clinicians in motivational interviewing for over 20 years. He has also provided counseling services to students at the University of Akron, as well as psychological services at Royalton Psychological Associates on a part-time basis. So without further ado, Dr. Russell Spieth.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you to the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health. Y'all look like a way smoother machine since I've gotten out of the way. So nice work, everybody. So yeah, thank you all for coming and for joining. I really want to start with a little bit of a role play. I think that's a nice way to kind of get things going. So Jessica was kind enough to agree to be a student in a particular situation. So I want to kind of just give you all a little heads up in terms of what to expect for this. Basically, what I'm going to try and demonstrate here, let's hope I'm successful, is really kind of like, how would you go about engaging somebody? I'm going to be representing the counseling department because that's what I know best in terms of on a campus community. But hopefully you'll be able to see how you might, if you work in a different area of the campus, like student conduct, for example, or maybe you're the person's advisor, or someone else on campus, how you might be able to use some of these strategies. Because essentially what I'm going to try and do in about 5 minutes is just demonstrate some ways you could use motivational interviewing to engage the person in a discussion about like what's happened and what can we agree upon going forward. So that's going to be kind of the goal. It's probably going to end, at an awkward point because you're not, I'm not trying to show you the whole session, or else that would be the entire presentation, but just a few minutes just to kind of hopefully highlight some of the things that then I will go through in the session. And one of the things to just keep in mind is that I know there's a variety of folks on here. Motivational interviewing has been shown to be effective for people involved in law enforcement, in particular, like judges, probation officers, parole officers, certainly for counselors and mental health types, medical providers as well. Also been shown to be effective with faculty members and professors and advisors. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that motivational interviewing could be helpful for a wide swath of folks. All right, Jessica, so you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay. So hello, Jessica. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Well, thank you. I really don't want to be here, but I'm here.
I get that. So like this was the last thing you wanted to do today.
It really is.
Okay. I hear. Well, what led you to come here, considering you really don't want to be here?
Well, I feel as though I'm being forced to come here because they caught me with a little bit of weed in my dorm room.
Gotcha. So to you, it seems like this is kind of overboard. Like yeah, you were caught with some weed, and I appreciate you, acknowledging that. I appreciate that. But it seems to you like this is kind of overboard to be forced to do all these things based on a little bit of weed.
Yeah, I totally think so because I mean it's like legal everywhere, and everybody is like using marijuana. So I don't understand why I've been singled out, and why they want me to come to counseling. I don't have a problem.
Okay, I hear that. So I get it. It can be confusing because there's a lot of messages around marijuana in particular. But as the student handbook suggests or says, any kind of use of THC products, marijuana, cannabis on campus is a code violation. And essentially any student who's caught in that situation, for them to remain in good standing and being a student, which is what we all hope, certainly what I hope, the kind of the recourse is having to engage in counseling. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what do you think about that? That, yeah, okay, there's society says certain things about marijuana, but nonetheless, our code of conduct suggests that that's a violation. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't agree with it, and I think that the code of conduct is just so behind the times because everybody is, or at least I feel like everybody is using, and I have to use because sometimes my anxiety is just so bad. I'm just trying to get through. COVID was really bad. And, it's hard as a student. So I'm really trying to do my best, and I'm not using just to use, but it helps me cope with my anxiety. Sometimes I feel a little depressed. And so that's just where I'm at.
I hear you. Like it sounds like marijuana for you has done a lot of positive things, and that you're not like using it recreationally. You're using it because it really helps you in a lot of ways, you believe, to be more present in the world and to be less distressed. I hear that. At the same time, we got this issue to where, our campus believes that people having marijuana on campus is not good for the whole student body. And sometimes that's hard, where something might be good for an individual, but may not be good for the whole student body. So that's kind of where we're at, is that, I understand from your perspective, it's really helpful and you don't see it as a harm. Unfortunately, we're in a jam where the campus community does believe it's a harm. And my role is to help support like the common good.
Yeah, I get that. And, I'm willing to try anything because I really want to be successful and completing, my first couple of years of college and graduating. Like I got a lot of plans after graduation. So I get it, but I don't get it. And maybe you got some strategies, some other things that you can help me to do, to work on my anxiety, to work when I'm like really nervous. This is like a new setting for me, and I really don't have too many people that I can talk to about this, and so that's where the marijuana has really helped me out.
I really appreciate your openness to like considering different options, and I kind of want to back up for a second. You said something really important that I think I need to know to understand you. Like, what are your goals? How come you're here? Like, what do you hope that, I don't mean in counseling, I mean on campus, like, what are you hoping to get out of your college career?
Well, I am hoping to graduate in 4 years. I really don't want to be here beyond that time. I'm really excited about becoming a teacher. I really like to work with younger people, and I like social studies and history, those sort of things. And so I really look forward to giving back, maybe even working in the same district that I went to high school. So
Wow.
I'm excited about that, but it's just been, again, really tough with COVID, being isolated and, getting back to campus. It happened at an awkward time. So that's really one of the reasons why I turned to marijuana. And again, one of the reasons why I continue to use, but willing to look at things so I can graduate and have a job and money and all that good stuff.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, it seems like even though you've been through a lot, like some emotional distress, the isolation of the pandemic, nonetheless, like you had this really powerful goal that you want to give back to other kids, but potentially even like people at the same school that you went to, and you had this real, interest in the subjects, and you really want to apply that in the world. So that's really fantastic. And one thing I want to say, like the work that we can do together, I'm not going to tell you that you can or can't use marijuana, right? All I will tell you is that on campus that's a violation. So maybe we could talk about ways that you could manage stress and anxiety while you're on campus. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think I'm open to it. So I think that would help.
Okay. All right. You're skeptical, but you'll see. All right. Thanks. Thank you so much. So basically, kind of what I was trying to demonstrate there and what we'll talk about is how to use motivational techniques to establish a working alliance. And that was really my goal with Jessica. Like I wasn't there to specifically at the beginning get into, okay, like what are we going to do to change her marijuana use, to modify it in any way. Really, my goal at that point was she was coming in, she didn't want to be there, she didn't think it was important to be there. So how do I make a connection where we can begin to work with one another? Detailed strategies to promote healthy change. You might have realized kind of at the end there, this kind of falls into harm reduction too. If I was her counselor, really my goal is for her to not be using cannabis on campus. And if she's using it off campus, to do it in a way that's safe. Because if that's the change she's willing to make at that point in time, that's a healthy change. For her to be able to finish her academic career, that's a healthy change. She can decide later on if she wants to abstain from cannabis all the way around. But really, my role in that intervention was to begin to think about how not to use it on campus, and off campus, how to use it in a healthier way, which again falls into that kind of harm reduction where it doesn't have to be abstinence only for people. And most people don't change by abstinence being their first step. Some people do, but most people don't, the research suggests. We take little steps and kind of go from there. So motivational interviewing is a motivational approach. It's evidence-based. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of randomized clinical trials at this point that suggest motivational interviewing is more effective than the typical kind of telling people what to do, being directive. I could have just really reinforced the rules. Well, Jessica, these are the rules and that's the rules and blah, 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 blah. I did do that, but I also wanted to give her opportunities to react to that and empathize with her that she doesn't like the rules. It's fine. She cannot like the rules. We can talk about that, but they can still be the rules, right? It can be done very briefly, and it's applicable across a wide range of problem areas. So everything from like the intervention you saw, to people exercising more, to people actually engaging in a study plan. It's been shown to be effective in all those areas, and by a broad range of helpers. I mean, you don't have to be a clinician at all to be able to use some motivational interviewing techniques. This is another definition I like a lot. Organizing conversations so people talk themselves into change based on their own goals and values. I tried to do that with Jessica when she mentioned, that she had a lot of goals for school. And I really wanted her to talk about that, because what I wanted her to think about in that encounter was, whoa, there's a lot of really powerful, important things I want to do in the world. And this marijuana use could mess that up, which is why I asked her, tell me more about why you're here. Harm reduction, again, it's just where you're working with somebody, a student in this situation, to reduce the risk of their behavior. And in terms of code of conduct, that might be maybe they're still doing things that we might say are unhealthy, but they're no longer violating the student code of conduct, right? Whereas that may be that sweet spot that you could agree on to work with that person. You can do this in very brief encounters, 5 to 10 minutes. Obviously, I'm a psychoanalyst too, so I might use it for, hours with people, not at one time, but like over weeks. So this is the MI spirit. It's kind of like our mindset when we're doing motivational interviewing. A big part of it is seeking collaboration, which I was really trying to do with Jessica. What do you think about those rules? Kind of trying to get her sense of her perspective. If it would have gone longer, I probably would have asked her, what are some of the things that you've already done to reduce your stress or your depression? But we didn't get to that point yet. But it's that idea where you're trying to figure out kind of what is the person you're working with ideas about things. Giving information in a neutral manner, which is what I tried to do, and kind of saying, okay, I get it. You don't agree with the rules, but these are the rules. But if you notice, I asked her, what do you think about that? And that's a really normal motivational interviewing thing when you're giving someone education or advice or a recommendation. Typically you ask permission first, which I didn't do that because we were already on that topic. But you would ask permission. Could I tell you more about the student code of conduct, for example, and how you violated it? Yes, please. Then you tell them, and then you wonder, what did they think about it? But you do it in a way that's not, where you basically, I can't think of another way to put it, but you don't have attitude. It's just kind of neutral and curious. Like, these are the rules. This is what it is. What do you think about it? Right. Another aspect of the MI spirit is acceptance, where you're trying to be empathetic. I was trying to do that with Jessica. If you notice, things that she was saying, I was trying to restate in different ways, so that she kind of understood that I was hearing her, and that it also gave her the opportunity to say, well, no, that's not exactly what I meant. And sometimes you may have noticed I at least perceived body language. And then, like, at the very end, I said, well, you're skeptical, but because that was what she was kind of giving off to me. And again, if she wasn't skeptical, that's fine. She could just say, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm not skeptical. I'm just thinking about a lot. But empathy is a big piece. And I always say to people, I think we forget this sometimes. I forget it. Empathy doesn't mean you agree with someone. So, for example, I can empathize with her that the rules are stupid, and that from her perspective, the rules are stupid. A little bit of weed is not a big deal, and it helps her a lot. That empathy is me understanding that's her perspective, right? I may not agree with those things, but that doesn't have anything to do with empathy. Empathy is truly understanding another person's perspective. Absolute worth, in the student, I worked on a college campus, not as long as many of y'all did. I did it for a few years, in part-time for a part of that. But, you can sometimes have a particular student that rubs you the wrong way, or kind of doesn't do things the way that you would, or, might annoy you, what have you. That's kind of human nature. But, like, these students were selected for a reason. They're worthy. They were worthy of this opportunity. And ultimately, we want to see them through, right? So it's like challenging ourselves to see the good, the worth, like really the perspective being, unless something really, really happens, like, my goal is to help see them through, right? Create a relationship with them so that we can see them through to graduation, which is all of our goal. Emphasizing autonomy. If you notice, I asked Jessica in a couple of different ways, how come she came? Because it's really normal where students will say, well, I felt like I didn't have a choice, which is what Jessica said, or they made me be here. No, really, like no one made you do anything. What you did was you chose to go through this process so you could remain a student. You could have chosen not to go through the process and not been a student any longer, right? So I think it's really important to emphasize that no, the person made a really good choice. They made a healthy choice. They made a choice to continue to pursue their education. It wasn't really that. I understand that the empathy is that it was like she had to be here, but ultimately she really didn't. And it's good to emphasize that that person made that choice. And ultimately, Jessica gets to decide what she's going to do, just like any of us does, right? We can talk to the word blue in the face, and ultimately people get the power to decide whether they're going to deal with the rules and regulations or not. And that's up to them whether they're going to deal with them, and accept the consequences that go with either complying with the rules or not. And affirmations is trying to catch people, as what my son's principal used to say, catch people being good. And I think that's really important in this context where you have people who are coming in and may not be the best version of themselves because probably they didn't want to wake up in the morning and go talk to student conduct or to a counselor, right? Like that's probably not what they were eager to do. Um, so affirming is just a way of like, seeing that positive. And I think a couple of times, like I think right off the bat with Jessica, I said, wow, I really appreciate you owning that or being open about that. Cause she acknowledged, yeah, I had marijuana. She could have lied about that. Right. So like for me, that's something to affirm. Wow, I really appreciate you saying that. Because she didn't have to. Compassion, basically be ethical. We all on a college campus have our kind of ethics or our rule, our own as employees, rules of conduct. And basically the idea of this is they label it compassion, but it's really making sure that you're doing what's good for the person's own welfare and for their best interests and to do no harm. Because sometimes people have done motivational interviewing that in a way that was harmful because it is a persuasive intervention. Evocation is where you're trying, is that thing again, that definition I referred to earlier, where you're trying to get the person to talk themselves into change. And again, one example I did with that was when I asked Jessica to talk more about like why was she like, what were her goals in life, and what did that mean in terms of the jam she was in right now, right? And that kind of drew out from her. Obviously, this wasn't her real situation, but something to the effect of, even though I don't really like this, I'm going to do it because I really want to be a teacher one day, right? That's the idea of evocation. And we I do too. I love to tell people things I think will encourage them or what have you. That's fine, but the research suggests we actually are our best persuaders. We listen to ourselves more than anything. So the more that you can get someone to talk themselves into change, the more likely they are to change. And that's really very consistent with motivational interviewing. So like, what are some of the specific strategies? Open questions. You probably noticed I was trying not to ask a lot of yes, no, because again, it's hard for someone to talk themselves into change when they're just saying, yeah, no, maybe, right? That's not a whole lot of stuff there. And also, I and the research believes human beings are storytellers, across time, culture, people, and there's a reason for that. Stories are important. They motivate us, they guide us, they encourage us. So open questions helps get that story out. I already said what affirmations were. Reflective listening, again, you may have seen some examples of that where I was trying to kind of rephrase what she said in the form of a statement. Summaries are kind of a long reflection. So if that session would have gone any differently, she would wound up kind of saying, yeah, I'll engage in it in counseling, right? Let's just say it didn't quite go there. It would maybe be something like, okay, on the one hand, you don't want to do counseling because you really don't think this is a big deal. You think it's way overblown. And plus, you don't think you can trust talking to a counselor. And on the other end, you're kind of open to it because you really do want to be a teacher and you see this as the path forward. And you did have a friend one time who went to counseling and they thought it was pretty beneficial. So summary is kind of like you're kind of reflecting back all of the things that they were saying. In particular, sometimes highlighting that ambivalence. This is why you do want to do it. This is why you don't want to do it. And informing with permissions, that thing I mentioned earlier, where you typically, before educating somebody or going over something. So again, for example, hey, would it be okay if I share with you the way that you violated the code of conduct? Yes. This is how you violated it. What do you think about that? So you ask permission, then you educate, then you wonder what they think about it. And obviously you can do that for stress and anxiety too. Like for Jessica, what if we were going on, I may have said, would it be okay I share with you some strategies that people use to abstain from marijuana use while on campus? And she might say yes. And then I would educate her. Then I'd say, what do you think about those ideas? Um, so this is an example of a reflection. So this is a student saying this is stupid, and well, it really, to do this justice, the student would be yelling, because that makes it kind of funny. This is stupid. I don't have an anger problem, and I don't need counseling, because I've heard a student say that, yelling at me about not having an anger problem, which is, I've probably done the same thing, so I'm not judging. So one way you can reflect back is kind of like they call it amplified. No matter the academic consequences, you prefer to make no changes at this time. That's like a really dramatic, I use those in only particular situations, but it's a pretty like, okay, like you in no way want to do anything different no matter what happens, right? A softer version of that is what they say called coming alongside. You are frustrated and see little benefit to counseling or emphasizing personal choice. You'll decide whether to take the steps to maintain your academic standing. So as you see, these are just different ways of kind of rephrasing or paraphrasing, I guess is the word, what the person said. And again, this is about expressing empathy. You don't need to agree, and it's not a part of doing this to agree with what they're saying. You're just letting them know that you're hearing what they say. So these are some specific strategies to evoke change talk. So the DARN, that's an acronym for desire. So why, I think I asked it something like that, like, how would you, like, what led you to want to come here, even though you didn't want to? So want, desire is want. Ability, if we went a little further in that session, I might say, well, how do you think you might be able to abstain from cannabis while on campus, right? So ability, desire is want, A is ability, how would you do it? Reason, if the session went further, I might have said, give me one or two good reasons that you're willing to engage in counseling. Need is important. How come it's important for you to engage in counseling? So these are just some kind of different strategies that you could ask about related to motivation, but tap kind of different parts of motivation. So then moving on to elaboration, this is again where I think about like the storytelling kind of storytelling drive, I guess I would say, of people. Not all people, but many people. And it's really trying to get someone to paint that picture more. So, honestly, if I was going to have even a longer session with Jessica, and she mentioned, like, she said kind of excitedly, like, I may even want to go back to my school I went to. I would ask her more, like, tell me more about, like, what would that be like to do that? How would you want to impact the kids? What did you go through in school that you think could inform the way you work with those kids? And why I would do it specifically in that kind of encounter Jessica and I were portraying is that really I want Jessica to tap into why are all the reasons why doing this stupid counseling and abstaining from cannabis abstaining, easier for me to say, abstaining from cannabis on campus, that's hard to say. Why is that all worth it? And I think the worth it is her telling herself about what it would be like to go back to her school and to have that role. And ultimately, if you're doing motivational interviewing, you need to know, what does this human being I'm in front of care about? What is going to make them be willing to do the really hard thing that they don't want to achieve that thing on the other side? So those are some of the reasons why elaboration are really important. And examples. So thinking about that encounter with Jessica, if we were going further, I might have said something like, because I'm gonna suspect that Jessica probably has not used cannabis every time in her life she felt lonely, isolated, depressed, or anxious. I might be wrong. Maybe she has, but I'm gonna take a wild guess that there's probably been times she has not used marijuana when she had those experiences. So I maybe would say something like, would you give me an example, if you have any, of when you felt those feelings and didn't use cannabis? And what I'm trying to do there is begin to help her see, okay, maybe there are some ways that I can tolerate distress on campus and not use marijuana, because lo and behold, I've done it before. And this seems kind of like, sometimes people wonder, well, why would you do that? Because she may know. But what's interesting about people is, a lot of times it's either you kind of forgot that you did that, or you minimized it, or it feels really different when you discuss that with somebody else. And it doesn't mean that she has all the answers. All I'm trying to help her see is that she might have some already ability to tap into, to be able to abstain from cannabis use while on campus. Decisional balance, we kind of like it. Jessica and I just barely talked about what we were going to do, because I like it when it's more kind of natural, even though that wasn't Jessica's issue, obviously. But nonetheless, like, I don't like it being all scripted out, because that's no fun. And we actually thought we'd get more into the pros and cons, but it didn't feel natural to me yet at that point. And plus, she already had mentioned a lot of the pros of marijuana use. I think this is one of the things that's really kind of unique about motivational interviewing, is that you are pretty proactively starting by asking people why they like the less healthy behavior, or in this context, why they like doing the thing that violates the code of conduct, right? So like the angry guy I referred to earlier, although he didn't believe he was angry, so how would I do that? I guess I wouldn't use the term angry, but like maybe agree that he shouts. So I'd say, like, well, what do you like about shouting when you're in the computer lab? What benefits do you get out of shouting at your teachers sometimes? What's the payoff of that for you? And oftentimes that's where you're starting. Obviously, with Jessica, it would have been, what are the things you like about using cannabis on campus? She was already kind of forthcoming with that. And there's a reason why you do that when you're trying to engage somebody. Why you start by asking what they like about the less healthy or the risky behavior. The first thing is, there's a lot of research to suggest that it puts the person that you're with more at ease, because they perceive you to be less judgmental. They perceive you to be more open-minded. And so there's that kind of element, right? That it might help with that alliance with that person, because they don't think that you're all, looking down on them. There's another obvious reason, is that I have never met a human being, not one yet, who didn't do something for a reason. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional that behavior might look to you. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional or harmful that behavior might look to the world. It doesn't matter that that behavior may in some ways seem dysfunctional to the person themselves. However, they're doing it for a reason. And that's a pretty tried and true thing about people, is we do things for reasons that on some level make sense to us. So how am I ever going to help? First of all, how am I going to help the person feel understood if I don't know why they do what they do? That seems pretty hard, right? But then secondly, how can I ever, if I'm more of in a counselor role, how can I ever be helpful towards maybe helping them make that change? And Jessica and I were already kind of moving in that direction, where she was telling us that marijuana use for her helped her manage the isolation, and then the coming back into the world from COVID to being a college student. She mentioned that it helped with depression and anxiety and isolation. And so as a counselor, that's places where I'd begin to wonder, right? Is what are some other ways that we can maybe help you feel less distressed without cannabis use, or at least without cannabis use on campus? So again, you start off, and this is really counterintuitive to people. You start off by wondering why they like doing the thing that's risky. And lo and behold, you actually empathize with it too. And I think I did that with her. I was like, I get that. Like, this has been hard. And for you, marijuana use has helped you through a lot of this. It doesn't matter if I believe that or not. Like, that's what she's telling me. And that's empathizing with her. and by the way, I mean, not her, because it wasn't only her, but I do believe people have those beliefs. So I'm not cynical either. Like, people have a lot of different beliefs. It's not for me to judge that. Um, but then you do obviously go into the drawbacks. Okay, so these are okay, so I get it. Like, these are some of the reasons why you really like using cannabis on campus. What are some of the drawbacks of it? What are some of the things that you don't like about it, right? So you kind of, that's the pros and cons. You ask why do they like the kind of risky behavior and why don't they like the risky behavior? And again, that's a way that you really begin to understand the person and their dilemma and kind of their ambivalence. Looking back, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but I think I gave an example of this a moment ago where I might say something like, hey, Jessica, if you have any, please tell me about a time that you felt like overwhelmed and lonely or sad and anxious and you didn't use cannabis. Tell me about that. How did that go? So you're looking for those, those opportunities for the person to kind of challenge their own black and white thinking and be like, no, actually, I have had some control over that in the past. Another example of that would maybe be, if she was beginning to kind of express that, that it seemed almost impossible to avoid using cannabis on campus just because she was so overwhelmed. And, she could say all kinds of things. I can't sleep at night, and then I can't make it to school, and I just don't think I can do this, which is a pretty common thing where people sometimes they may come to a point where they believe they need to make a change because it's important, but they may not feel confident they can make a change. And that was where I might ask something like, tell me about another time in your life you overcame something you didn't think you could. And that's a way of her telling her story that might build her confidence to take this next step. Looking forward, I think I did this when we met. Again, I really wanted her to tell us why she was going through school and how come school was so important that she was willing to do this thing she really didn't want to do, which is come to counseling. Asking about extremes, that's another thing that you can do to bring out change talk. So like in this encounter with Jessica, I may have said, what's the best thing that happens if you realize that you don't have to use cannabis on campus and you never have to deal with student conduct again? Like, what's the best thing that happens if you absolutely nail that? And on the other side, what's the worst thing that happens if you continue to use cannabis on campus and you get caught up in student conduct? And like, a lot of times people want to tell you, we want to tell people, well, this is going to be the awful thing that happens to you, and this is going to be the great thing that happens to you. I'm going to argue that our information about that is going to be much less persuasive than Jessica or the student you're in front of. They have their own very positive story that you don't know, and they have their very own scary story that you don't know. So I think asking them to think through and talk through those extremes is going to get a lot more traction than you trying to tell them about all the awful things that happened to students who didn't get it, or all the great things that happen to students who didn't get it. And again, it doesn't mean that you don't share sometimes information. Will it be okay if I share with you how some other students dealt with this? Sure, definitely. But I'm just saying, again, trying to lean into the student's own perspective is typically where you're going to start when you're doing motivational interviewing. I'll show you the importance and confidence rulers in a moment. And again, sometimes just exploring goals and values in and of themselves. It's kind of like, I was interesting. If I had more time with Jessica, I would have wondered, because I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old. So I know that cannabis use just does not just happen on college campuses. Lo and behold, it happens in middle school bathrooms and high school bathrooms as well. And she's talking about being a teacher one day. And so, like, if we were working together for a while, I might wonder with her how she would talk to a student who is using cannabis in the bathroom, right? And as a way of helping kind of to really put together her values of highlighting her value of wanting to do what's good for the student and for the student population. But my basic point here is sometimes just having people explore their own goals and values is encouraging enough and motivating enough that they'll be like, yeah, I really can't keep doing this because I'm not going to let that mess with my school because everybody in my family is counting on me, blah, 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 blah. So these are the change rulers. Sometimes people think that these are a little bit corny. Y'all can think whatever you want. I use them all the time. I've been using them for 20 something years. I use them a lot, and it helps me a few different ways. It helps evoke change talk. So something like, when considering your goal of being a school teacher on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is it for you to abstain from marijuana use while on campus? And, let's just say Jessica said, I'm a 3. I would say, how come you're a 3 and not a 1, or some lower number? And when you ask the lower number, it draws out whatever part of them does think it's important to change. So it's a good strategy because it helps you understand, or it helps them have the opportunity to talk themselves into change. This also helpful because you begin to learn where the person's stuck. Is it importance? And if it's importance, you might begin to think about developing discrepancies. So how does that ongoing cannabis use on campus that can lead them to getting kicked out of school, how does that intersect with their goal of being a high school teacher one day, right? So you're trying to help people see that their goals and values are inconsistent with this unhealthy behavior. And that can sometimes may lead people to think it's important to change over time. So when we think about motivation, one aspect of it is importance. I'm not going to stop using marijuana on campus unless I think it's important to do that, right? If I don't care about getting kicked out of school, I'm not even showing up for that counselor meeting, right? None of this is important. I don't care. But there's also the other aspect of that is confidence. So on the same note, if maybe I think it's really important that I need to stop using cannabis on campus, but I'm not confident I can do it. And that's a student who would be saying something like, I know I can't get kicked out of here. I know it's awful. My roommates hate it, like blah, 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 blah. I'd spend too much money. It all sucks. The problem is I can't do it. I haven't stopped smoking weed for 15 years, right? So that's a person who's telling you that they know it's important. They're just not confident. And it's helpful to know where people are stuck because the interventions are a little different. But you can do a confidence ruler as well. And this is something I don't know why I dealt with this a lot when I was teaching when I was involved in different campuses, not just University of Akron, because I also did some internships at some other schools. But on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can avoid looking at pornography in the school computer lab? Same kind of deal. Okay, you're a 4. How come you're a 4 and not a 2, right? And that draws out whatever part of them is confident that they'd be able to make that change. So what if someone is not confident, right? This person says, I don't know. I have no control over it. I think I have a porn addiction. Every time I buy a computer, I can't stop, right? But I know it's going to kick me out. And I know it's gross. I know people hate it, right? They're telling you they know it's important, but they're just not confident they can do it. So these are things you can do to help build people's confidence. You can frequently acknowledge the positives, like even what that person just said, or I pretended that they said, wow, that's really honest. And you know yourself really well. I appreciate that courage it takes to say that. Highlighting their past successes. Well, you got into school here and that's really hard. And obviously you had to get on the computer. How did you do that? So setting small goals and celebrating success. So, maybe in this instance, the person's in the computer lab for 5 minutes and then they have to step out for a little bit and they come back in for 5 minutes. And that's the way that they can avoid looking at pornography when they're on the screen because they leave so quickly. Encouraging consideration of role models. I don't know that person would know a person in that situation, but it's something like, tell me about a person that you identify with who made that change or who struggled with that and got through it. Because research is pretty clear when we see people who we perceive are like us do things, it's easier for us to believe that we can do it. So a lot of times I'll ask people, is there somebody that you identify with that you've seen make that change? What does that mean in terms of your ability to make that change? In relapses, I mean, obviously there's going to be a consequence in school and it could be catastrophic. Like the person could get kicked out and that's the reality of the world we live in. However, that's not actually a catastrophe because people can still rebuild their lives. Probably wasn't the best way to put it. That's a big deal, right? But in the general sense, like when people have slip ups, it's really about helping them learn from that experience and how can they not recreate it the next time. So ultimately, And I missed an opportunity to do this. I just realized, you may get to the point where the person says, you know what, I am ready to make that change. And actually, I think Jessica said that. I think she said, yeah, I'm willing to meet with you, or I think it was something like that. And really, if I'm practicing what I'm preaching, I should have said, how come? How come you decided that? Because again, it gives her another opportunity to talk themselves into change. And that's a way you strengthen change talk. When someone commits to a change, you might wonder, how come now? How come it's important? What led you to decide to do that? Because again, that's going to be that story where, she's going to say, well, I realize I'm going to be looking really stupid if I get put out of school for cannabis use when my goal my whole life has been to be a teacher. Right? That's a powerful statement for her to hear herself say. Sometimes you might be, and this is obviously a little bit more in the counseling realm, maybe. Obviously, you could do this as an advisor too, and in certain other roles as well. I just know counseling best than the other roles. But we all, there's a big joke in our society that like everybody sets New Year's resolutions, and then by the 3rd of January, you've already forgotten about it, or you've already relapsed, or what have you. So, it's kind of normal for human beings to set goals and to fall short. It's part of being human. So sometimes you might, so for example, with Jess's scenario, like let's say we agreed she was going to come back next week. I might say something like, that's really great. I'm glad you made that decision. I can't wait to keep working with you. Not for nothing. What would be some things that might get in your way of coming back here? And the idea is to kind of troubleshoot in that moment, what are some things that might come up? And if they were to come up, how could she or we help her work through that so that she could still stick to her goal? Because again, lots of people say, yeah, I'm going to do that. And they have, I think, the intention to do that at the time, but then they wake up in the morning and they're like, I just don't really want to do that. It's just kind of normal. And lastly, that I kind of gave an example of this earlier, the summarizing. So the reasons why you don't want to change are because of this reason, that reason, the other reason. And the reasons why you do want to change are because of this reason, that reason, the other reason. At this point, the reasons to change outweigh the others. So you like to explore ongoing counseling. That's just an example of like a what we call a summary, which is a very long reflection of a person's kind of change process. And then lastly, in motivational interviewing didn't come up with this. This is really co-opted from the world of business, where the research suggests that people are much more likely to do something if they create a SMART goal. I actually, this is a real one for somebody who used to act up on campus when they used alcohol and marijuana together. This is when for them, I'm not talking about using it on campus, but when they would come onto campus after using alcohol and marijuana, it was not good for them or anybody around them. And this is a real harm reduction goal. They weren't ready to abstain from those substances. What they were ready to do is not use them together. Hey, okay, let's see how that goes. So that was the goal, to not use alcohol and marijuana together. That's the specific goal. It's measurable. I mean, you could do a drug test, right? You could test that, or you could just ask them. And you could ensure that you could be able to measure whether they were using them simultaneously. Achievable. This person thinks they could do that. Like it's a challenge, or they would have already been doing it, but they think they could do it. It's within reach. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant. They believe the combination of the drugs leads to the most negative consequences. In the harm reduction world, what you're trying to do is alleviate the most negative consequences. See if it works. So that it's relevant to them. It makes sense to them. In time. So over the next week, student will abstain from marijuana during drinking episode and abstain from drinking during marijuana use episode. So you kind of watch it and see how it goes over a week. And then lastly, I just have some of the references that I referenced in the slides. And then I should have put on here too, there's a really good resource. It's a free website called www.motivationalinterviewing.org, www.motivationalinterviewing.org. It's got lots of really good free resources and really good videos with bad acting, not nearly as good acting as what Jessica and I did, that you could watch and see, get some more examples or tips or things like that. And so, yeah, I appreciate it. And again, Jessica, thanks for helping me out with that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And thank you, Russell. It was certainly a wonderful opportunity to participate in that role play with you. And I just want to let everyone know that if you have questions and or comments, you can please feel free to place them in the chat and or Q&A function. And we do already have a few questions that have already been posted. Again, thank you, Russell, for providing that very, very good information, a lot of insight on a lot of our participants who probably are experiencing, some of the scenarios that we talked about, including marijuana usage, cannabis usage, as well as other sort of things. And I also too want to just reflect on a few other comments or mention regarding the role play scenario. One is about great active listening, empathy, and policy explanation. And then another point regarding humanity, right? And recognizing that we're all human, right? And really approaching this and looking at this from that humanity element. And so our first question that is posted, and I think you kind of talked about this, right? Regarding behavior, right? That can impact the opportunity to become a teacher. In particular, they are looking for, if that student was charged and found responsible for that code violation, would you add anything else to that if this were, let's say, discoverable in a background check? Would you add anything else for the behavior and that opportunity and discussing that with the student?
If it was discoverable in a, gotcha. Like, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, good. That's a good question. So basically, I think what I'm hearing is like, if this behavior could actually jeopardize their ability to be a teacher. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So if I, first of all, if I didn't know that for sure, which I don't know that for sure, whether this kind of thing would go to that level, I would probably ask the person, like like Jessica in this situation. I'd say, hey, Jessica, like, I'm just kind of wondering, how well do you know the background checks that they do for teachers, and how might this affect that, right? Which I probably might do that anyways, even if I didn't know, because again, that idea that I want to put it back in her lap for her to kind of wrestle with that and look into it, right? But then, if I was doing due diligence and like, if it was really happening in a session and I didn't know and Jessica didn't know, I think what I would do is by the next time I say, you know what, Jessica, if you haven't already, or you're not going to, or, you would prefer me to, I'll look into it and we'll go over it. And then kind of in that motivational interviewing way, depending on how we're talking about that issue, I might say, well, hey, Jessica, would it be okay if I share with you how this infraction might affect your ability to become a teacher? And then her say yes or no. If she says yes, then I would educate her about that, and then wonder what she thinks about it. And I want to talk about yes and no for a minute. First of all, I've probably asked that question, like, would it be okay if I share with you? I probably asked that question a few thousand times in my career. I have still never had anybody say no. It will happen eventually, and that's fine. It will happen, but no one has ever said no. And honestly, people are more like, whoa, like appreciative that I was respectful and just didn't start spouting off about stuff that I knew or I thought they wanted to know. So to me, really, there's only, and so, like, there's certain types of things where you couldn't ask that question. Like, if someone's going to engage in counseling and they've agreeing to, I have to review the informed consent with them. It's not like, oh, would it be okay if I review the informed consent with you? Because that's something that if they are engaging in counseling, that that's something that they have to do for me to even begin to interact with them. And there's probably other things like that for other parts of the campus that you really couldn't ask a yes or no, because you really just have to do it. But you still ask what people think about it, right? And the truth is, most things people have the right not to be educated about. And as a counselor, I just say, attempted to educate client about such and such, client refused. That's people's right not to be educated. So yeah, but really good question. So I think I would figure out a way to bring it in, but I might wonder from her perspective first what she knew about it, and would she be willing to look into it?
Excellent. And I think as a follow-up, there's another question I think that could possibly go along with kind of difficulties in engagement. But it really is asking, what are some ways, maybe a sentence or so of that you would engage a student who refuses to open up and or participate. And it's asking for a specific example. Would you ask an open-ended question or just give a very brief one sentence, one word answer?
That's a good question. Like, I've definitely had that happen, and I've done it a few different ways. Like sometimes I use a lot of reflection. So if the person is like sitting there looking miserable with their hands crossed, I might say something like, "This is the absolute worst for you. I am the last person you want to be dealing with right now." And kind of reflecting their body language. And I found that like I've had a lot of people laugh when I'm like, expressing what I think they're putting off non-verbally. But not always. And then sometimes I might say something like, "I'm kind of confused because you came here and yet you're not talking. Help me understand that." Again, they might not say anything, but I would kind of like just in a non-accusatory way, just kind of express confusion about that. If they were giving one-word answers, and again, it kind of depends on the person, what else they're putting off, but I might just kind of say, "Hey, it seems like I'm not someone you're feeling comfortable to talk with." Or, I might kind of put that out there. But ultimately, like if they have to kind of participate in this, like, if they're actually mandated to talk to me, at a certain point, I'm going to have to say, well, like a part of this is that I have to report back that you were engaged in the process. And that means you were interacting with me by at least answering some questions. And at this point, I can't say that. And that might jeopardize you being compliant. So there's kind of a few different ways I would do it, but yeah.
Yeah, and then one final question. Thank you for that response, by the way. And you may or may not be aware of this, and so may even have to inquire with our audience. But the question is regarding the Office of Conduct working alongside Student Disability and Accommodations offices, excuse me. Are you aware of that? If there's follow-up that's needed, if they need to leave 15 minutes early for class, whether or not that happens?
Definitely. I can only speak from a few, like many of you probably have much more experience with that, but I've definitely seen with appropriate like releases of information and that type of thing, consents by the student, that Office of Student Conduct can work very well hand in hand with Office of Accessibility in a way to, even around like depression and anger, right? For some people, depression manifests a lot as anger, in providing kind of strategies that protect the common good, but that help that student with that depression, anger situation to get their needs met in a kind of more individualized way. So yes, I have seen that happen with appropriate consenting, the student being, on board with that. It's not my total area of expertise. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that example, and also for the presentation today, Dr. Spieth. We certainly appreciate that. One last time, for those who are interested in obtaining CEU CME credits, the activity code is 12 ALTO, and Chris has posted it within our chat function. Again, it will expire within 24 hours. We also want to welcome you back on March 30th, almost maybe a continuation of this conversation regarding substance misuse trends in higher education. So March 30th at 11:30 a.m., we want to welcome you back. We also value your feedback. So whether or not you are interested in CMEs and CEUs, we would love to hear from you. And so even if you have interest in just sharing your feedback on today's presentation, we invite you to complete that summary. There's a question about registration for the March 30th session. If you have access to social media, we also can email you directly and or our website. So there's information as well as a registration link that is listed on there. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Spieth, for your presentation. Thank you all for joining us, and we will hope to see you back on March 30th. Thanks again, and goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.